So up until now, we've looked at JavaScript just in terms of a pure language. We've looked at its qualities like data types, so strings, arrays, objects, and up until the last few years, JavaScript was popularly and just commonly used for interactions in the browser. Okay, so HTML puts the content on the browser, right? We can put text, images, just hard content in the browser. And it doesn't look like anything, it's just kind of black and white. It kind of lines up along the left when you add it. Now, CSS, when you put that into the mix, it adds some color. It's like adding paint to the walls, okay? We can now give things color. We can position things center, left, right, and you can start to get layouts. But what about interactions? What about when the mouse hovers over something? Or what about when, I click somewhere and something else on the page reacts? That's where JavaScript really excels. And, like I said, up until the last few years, JavaScript was commonly used for that kind of thing, interactions. In the last few years, it's really picked up and become, people are starting to take advantage of a lot more of its features, which we won't quite get into totally in this, series. But just keep in mind, for example, when we look at this Apple website here, I'm simply just scrolling and you're seeing a lot happen here. Okay, so you're seeing there's this header menu up here that kind of goes away. This text right here will disappear, and then this entire image is zooming out, all with the simple scroll. You see how the header goes away, the text fades out, and this image is kind of zooming out into this screen as I scroll down. And then it stops zooming out, and I can keep scrolling down, and we're seeing other interactions on the page. We saw that kind of change, and so on. And that's where JavaScript really excels. We can do all kinds of really cool interactions, and this is simply just by scrolling down the page. Now, there was a technology called Flash, or I should say there is a technology called Flash and ActionScript, and those were commonly used for this kind of thing too, but JavaScript has kind of prevailed as the preferred way to kind of just, do these kinds of interactions in a browser. So let's talk about that. This is where JavaScript, kind of comes to life. We've looked at it as a language, but now let's look at it in the context of a browser. And when you look at JavaScript in the context of a browser, you often hear people refer to this DOM. This is the document object model. Basically, this is just another way of looking at an HTML document. That's all the DOM is. But the reason why we want to look at it this way is because it's easier when we're working with JavaScript. It's easier to kind of visualize what we're about to affect, right? So again, going back to this Apple example here, this is a part of the DOM. This is part of this HTML document, and as long as we can isolate that with JavaScript, we can tell it to go away when we scroll down. Okay, so this will make more sense in a second. So take a look at this right here. This is a DOM example here. This is the tree of objects. Okay, so when I say DOM, I'm talking about visualizing a document like this. Okay, so at the very top, the parent object, when you're working with a browser, okay, when you're looking at its screen, when you're working with the browser, is the document object, okay? And you don't see this anywhere in this browser, whether I'm on this site or Google or any other site, you don't see this thing called document here, but that's the parent object, and we can access that in JavaScript just by simply writing the word document, and we'll see that in a second, okay? But simply just writing lowercase document dot something, we're able to then access this object. And if you remember, accessing objects, all you have to do is this dot notation. So hold on to that thought, and we'll get to that in a second. Okay, so this is the parent object, and then just under that, you've got this root element here. This is yet another object, and it's called HTML. And there you go. When they say that, they're really referring to this parent object. Remember, you want to think of this as nesting, okay? So this chart is just another way to look at a nested document. At the very root, you've got this HTML element right here. And then inside of it, you've got a head and a body element. Okay, so there's the head opening and closing. Remember, you have to open and close in HTML. And then there's the body. So technically the HTML object has two children objects. It's got the head right here on the left and the body right here on the right. And as we can see, we're consistent when we write standard HTML documents. There's the head, there's the body. Okay, so HTML, it's got two children, and then inside of it, you can have many, many more, right? Inside the head object, you could have a title object, and then that title object might have text inside of it. So that's yet another object. So here's the title object, these tags, and inside of them, there's a text object. There's this actual text inside. We could put whatever we want in there. So there's also these script objects. And then here's this H1 object that's inside the body object. So you're starting to see now that we can refer to these, these nodes or these objects and look at them kind of like this. It's the same thing. So if you kind of look at a chart like this and let it kind of sink in, you'll see that they're kind of the same thing here, okay? So if you're curious about looking for this, you can Google the word DOM, HTML DOM. You can also just go to this website, w3schools.com, and you can find it there. But it's just a good reference and kind of a good comparison. It's just another way to look at an HTML document. So now what we're going to learn is how to use JavaScript to reach in and grab a particular element. Like if I want to reach in and target this H1 and do something to it. We learned in CSS, it's pretty simple. You just type, inside your style tags, you would type H1 and you'd be able to select this. So similarly with JavaScript, we're going to be able to reach in there and then add interactions. If I hover over the H1, can we make something happen to it? So things like that.